Welcome back to Debut Writers, the podcast where we demystify the writing process and the path to publication one episode at a time. Today, my guest is Amy Nielsen, a literary agent at the Purcell Agency, specializing in young adult and picture books. With nearly 20 years of experience as a youth librarian, Amy brings a deep understanding of story and audience to her agenting work. In addition to her work as an agent, Amy is a freelance developmental editor, published author, and the founder of the Mayflower Media, where she helps authors bring their stories to life through editorial support and compelling book trailers. So, Amy, we are so excited to have you on Debut Writers today as we dive into the critical role of editing in the querying process. So, Amy, when writers hear that their manuscript needs to be submission ready, that can mean a lot of different things. So, from an agent's perspective, what does that actually look like?
First off, thank you for having me, and thank you for the resources that you bring to authors that are either in the querying trenches or hope to be, or even, authors at any stage of their writing career. I've learned so much from your podcast, and
Thank you.
hopefully, listeners will learn something from me today. So, that can be a very ambiguous question to answer. I was actually talking with my daughter earlier today, and about kind of about this topic, but I was relating it to my mother-in-law back in the 90s, I think, used to scrapbook. And remember the big books and you put
Yes.
pictures and clip art and decorate it and all these different patterns and hers were so good. And then I'm trying to do it and I'm like, and I asked her, I said, "How do you know when the page is done?" And she's like, "When you stop working on it." So
Oh, that's good.
So kind of like it's almost a little bit like that, but there are some steps to take to ensure that it is as far as you can get it. Now, I don't expect anyone to go pay a professional editor to edit their entire manuscript and spend thousands of dollars before it comes to me. Because first off, if you do that, you're really, you know, you love what you have and you authors may be more hesitant for feedback and things like that. That doesn't mean that you can't pursue some help. But I think for me, when I open up a submission, the first thing I see is the query, and that is part of the submission packet. It is the first thing that an agent is going to read. And so to get us down to your pages, that query has to do the heavy lifting of encouraging us to continue to want to read. So there are some things you can do just right off the bat before we even talk about polishing your pages to be closer to being ready to get that agent's attention. And have you had someone on that's done a deep dive into how to write a query?
No, that is actually coming in the next series where we talk about how to actually query and get published and reaching out to publishers and agents. And maybe we'll even have you back on the podcast and we can like super deep dive into queries. But I definitely think it's important to mention it here because it is part of the process of your writing.
hmm And I have kind of like a webinar. It's free on my website, Polishing Your Submission Packet Before Querying, where I have a very systematic formula for writing that query. And sometimes authors think formulas are not good. Everything needs to be original. And we're talking about that query. A formula is good. I want to know what I'm about to read so I'm not disoriented. So I think that's really important. I'd love to come back and talk to your listeners specifically about how to write that query so it gets an agent to read those pages. But let's say you've written the query and it has gotten my attention. It's something that I rep. I understand what the story is about and I'm eager to dive in. So I'm going to first open up your pages and typically um, agents either ask for 5 or 10. And before I even read one word, I'm going to visually scan those pages. And what I'm looking for is that the document isn't chunks and chunks and chunks of large blocks of text. And
Uh-huh.
you may be thinking, that's not reading, but what I'm doing is I can tell a lot by that. If I see large chunks of text, and I've opened up some documents where it's just, there's no dialogue, there's no paragraphs, And to me, I already can tell that's not gonna be for me because I'm looking for a story that's gonna jump right into a scene where a character is
Mhm.
gonna be interacting with another character, where there's tension, where there is stakes, and where things are happening on the page. And so it's tempting, especially as a debut. You have all this stuff that you want your reader to know before they dive into the story. And guess what? They don't need to know it. You need to know it, but they don't need to know it. So I think the first thing is just look at your opening pages, and we'll kind of stick to opening pages because everything that we'll talk about can be pulled through your entire manuscript. But I think
Agreed.
just visually, how does it look? Am I going to get reader fatigue reading 5 paragraphs of world building? And things that, again, if you have done in your first chapter, that's okay. Cut it out and put it somewhere where you have it for later, but you really want to start in a scene.
Yes, those first pages are so incredibly important, and I am actually, like, the first couple lines, like, I as a thriller author and you rep thriller, it's
Mhm,
like I am really trying to just, like, catch you with those first lines. Recent author that I started reading was Frida McFadden,
mhm.
and I liked her because I really love her first lines. I think she does such a great job and talk about a formula. All of her books are the same, by the way.
Right.
She follows a very strict formula, you can tell, but it works for her.
Mhm.
She a big author, but I read a bunch of her books, and some of them I only read the first couple of pages because I was really trying to improve my first pages. And so even sometimes that as an author too, if you have a certain author that you really like that really
Mhm.
catches you, you read a bunch of their stuff, really dive into what their first pages look like and what keeps you reading those first pages.
Exactly. Exactly. And a great place to do that is on Amazon. You can typically read a sample for free, and get those first pages. And I like what you said about a first line. I have some things that I call risky moves in your opening pages and less risky. And I call them that because risk can also often have a big payout, and not taking risks can often sometimes hold you back. But as a debut, typically you want to stay within those guidelines. And that's on my website as well, risky versus less risky openings. But what you said about a killer first line, first off, do not stare at the blank page trying to come up with that line. Don't do it. Write the book. Write the book. But if you've written, and you have, your book is unique to you. There's it hopefully comps other books out there, but it's a unique story. So give your first line that same amount of tender love and care that it is unique.
Mm,
And I hesitate to for authors to start with dialogue because
mm.
we don't know who's talking. We don't know these characters yet. A little bit of setup, but I'm talking a little bit.
Yes,
And
very low.
not that the first line of my book is anything magnificent, but I was very intentional with it. That it's a young adult novel, and the first line is innocence is irreplaceable currency, and I was gambling mine away like a secret addiction. So automatically, that this character is a teenager, that
Mhm.
they are still innocent, but they are wanting to get into some stuff. They're wanting to spread their wings and experiment. And you can see some things that are going to be happening probably in this teenager's life very soon. And it does happen very soon. And kind of a lot of teenagers go through that. But it's like that first line sets up what you're going to be getting a teenager struggling with maintaining her innocence while still being a teenager and experimenting with the things that teenagers want to experiment with. So I just think really and also, in addition to a great opening line, the last line of that first 10 pages, also you want it to pique curiosity. So
Mhm.
the agent wants to say, I have to know what happens next. Can you send me the full?
Yes,
It's
yes.
so important. It's so important. Those bookends that really do that heavy lifting. That first line keeps you reading, and that last line makes you want to ask for more.
And I think a lot of authors too, they especially debut writers, they focus so much on those first couple of pages. If they've, done any research whatsoever, they've learned how important those first pages are. But I love how you pointed out the ending point of those 10 pages. Like, don't just end it wherever that 10-page mark is. Like, really be intentional with where you are ending those pages. Because again, like you said, you want that agent to say, I have to read the rest of this
Yeah.
right now. Like, you've got to send it right now.
Well, and I've even spoken to many authors about just that. So be intentional. If your first chapter is 12 pages, I promise you, you can dial it back to 10. And so that way the agent gets a full chapter or even, and I had one of my critique partners do this. She writes dual POV romance. She's got like 5 books out now. And we started critique partners when neither one of us were published, and so proud of what she's done. But um, we revised when we were critique partners, one of her books, a romance, to where each character's POV was only 5 pages. So that way she could send, when she would send the 10, which is what most agents request, they got to see the full, each full POV. And so those are definitely intentional things that you can choose to do to make sure that, because as an agent, when I get a submission and like the 10 pages end, and I'm like, I know there's another 15 in this chapter,
Yeah.
it's, you can dial it back. And I think those things do really show that you've done a deeper dive than maybe a lot of other people have.
Yes, and I think it's really important to also point out just how important it is for those first 10 pages, like how much we take away from those 10 pages, because that's something else that authors have always like told me when I'm like, well, send me your first 10 pages. They're like, that's it. That's
Right.
all you need. Like in 10 pages, you can tell me if you like my book or not. And I'm
Yep.
like, I can tell you if I like your writing and I can tell you if it's worth my time to read your book. But in the first 10 pages, I can probably tell you in the first page sometimes. Like, especially you can
Mhm.
see if it's ready or not.
Yeah. I had attended several of the Reading Day workshop conferences, and one of my favorite panels is the first pages panel. And in that panel, there's agents on the stage, like 5 or 6 of us, or a half dozen, and then authors that have come to the conference have submitted that choose to submit their first page anonymously, and then there's an MC that reads them. And as they're reading, we as agents, when we would have known we would have passed, we start raising our hands. And once 3 people have raised their hands, the MC stops reading and we say why.
Brutal.
Well, it's so educational and informative, right? And it's anonymous. So and the agents are kind with their comments, but the same things do come up over and over and over again. And a couple of them are things like I said before, we're starting the story not in a scene. We're starting with a character in their head, or we're starting with a character alone, or we're starting with description instead of a character doing something. And people read for characters. We enjoy an immersive setting and we enjoy a plotty twist, but we read because we fall in love with the characters. So
Uh-huh.
that is who should be on the page first as our main character in a scene pursuing a goal with obstacles in their way and tension. So those are the things that you're really looking for in those first pages. Main character, pursuing a goal, stakes, things in their way, tension, and the ability to give enough information while still leaving the reader curious. So again, it's very easy to fall into, they need to know everything so they understand, which what that does is that takes the reader out of the active role of being a participant in the story. And we as readers want to be an active participant and put 2 and 2 together. Oh, that's what they meant. Now I get it. And
Yeah.
so I've read a lot like that. I think another something that's really important too that I see a lot in queries is or submissions is cliche openings. And
Yes.
yes, all there is gonna be a time that your main character is gonna need to be en route somewhere probably. They're probably gonna need to get in a car or on an airplane to go somewhere. But I think one year or one week I was open to submissions, and in, like, a week, I received, I think, 6 manuscripts that all started with a character en route somewhere. All of them were alone, and most of them were in a car. And so and I did give that feedback to those writers, not that that's not an okay way to open your story, but I mean, you can see where it's called a cliche opening for a reason, and they start to all seem the same.
Yeah.
Your story should have as unique an opening as your story is. And researching what those cliche openings are, things like starting with the weather or character en route, a character sitting and thinking, um, uh, a funeral, the reading of a will. And yes, you will find hundreds of books on the shelves that start with these openings. And that's why
Which is
they're
why they become cliche.
and you will also find authors that still do it and pull it off because they do it in such a unique way. So, again, that's one of those risky moves
Yeah.
versus less risky. If your book must start with your character in a car, make it super interesting and compelling and unique. And also consider not doing that.
Yeah. Also consider maybe like the scene before or the scene after. Yeah. So I teach a writing course, and I was just telling my students this week about character and how character drives that story. And I had them kind of pause and think about their favorite books and what made them that favorite book. Like what made them
Mhm.
want to read more of that author or read that series. And I'm like, it's the character. You somehow
Absolutely.
connected with that character in some
Yes.
way. And that is why you are connected to that story now. So again, so important to make sure that you're starting with that character and getting us invested in that character is really important. Also, I see a lot of fantasy authors. They're like, but I need to tell you about the world you're on because we're not on Earth and we're in this whole other universe. And you're like, we have probably 80,000 words for you to just drop that in every now and again and let me
Or
know what's going.
120 if you're fantasy.
Yes, I know, right? Like, so many more words, so many more pages, but
Well,
you have time to build that. You don't have to just, again, like, info dump all that right there in the first pages.
and a great way to do that and is through the character interacting with the world. They touch something, they step on something, they walk by something, through them interacting with it as opposed to the info dumping. Also, we don't need to know the history of the politics of this fantasy world. We're going to learn that as we go. And again, that's kind of a lot of author's just nervous that the
Mhm,
reader's not going to get it. And that's okay for them to not get it in the beginning. They'll figure it out and they
mhm.
want to figure it out. And you were talking about this earlier too, I believe with Deborah on an episode that I think just released today. Um, you were talking about character description. And this kind of goes along the same thing with world building is that as authors, sometimes we tend to want to describe every detail of our character so the author understands. Well,
Mhm.
or the reader. And the reader, again, they want to figure those things out and build that character inside their head, how they see that character. And
Yes.
not that you can't show some of those traits, like if a character's tall, they have to stoop to get under a tree or something, a tree limb. I mean, you can show, but it's again with the character interacting with the world. Or if a character notices something in someone else, I don't I can't tell you the last time I really sat at someone and stared at their eyes or noticed their eyes when I first met them. Noticed their eyes every time I saw them after that. So it's those things too, which kind of start to feel repetitious. I think looking for repetition and echo, as sometimes it's called in your manuscript, can be important in some of that fine tuning of the drafting, such as character name. Um, I just read a picture book and the character's name is like 20 times in the manuscript of 500 words. No, unless it's with intention. If you can use a pronoun and we still know who's speaking, go that route. Another thing that I think is really important, and Deborah also mentioned a resource that I'm going to talk about as well, but I'm going to talk about it in a different way than she talked about it. So, going back to the length of the paragraph and just reader fatigue, is also length of sentences
Yes.
because, and that's another thing that I think as early emerging writers, we mistakenly think lengthy sentences make us look smart. Lengthy sentences lose a reader.
Mhm.
They get lost. It's too hard to keep. What's important in this sentence? The first thing, the last thing, the middle thing. And I deep dive with my clients on sentence length. And the program is called Autocrit, and that's what Deborah talked about today as well.
Yes.
And I love that program. There is a free version. She talked about a 30-day trial. I used the program with my own revision until I learned what I needed to learn from it to not need it anymore. So it's very much an educational tool, but you can upload, let's say, we're taught your first 10 pages. You can upload your first 10 pages. And this isn't like AI that it's using your work to train, it's whatever. Um, your stuff just stays there, but you can upload it and you can do an analysis of all the sentence length, and it will tell you exactly how many sentences you have above 40 words, 30 words, 20 words. And then you can click and it'll take you right there so you can fix them. Because the average length of a sentence in fiction is about 10.5 words. Now, that doesn't
Oh,
mean
okay.
all of your sentence is 10 words, but I have opened up, I kid you not, I have opened up a submission of 10 pages and had a 45-word first sentence. Automatic no, because that tells me probably they're everywhere. And that's a sign of, again, overriding and not understanding that concise, brief, simplistic language tells a story way better
And that's where I think
than
also too, like, reading
Mhm.
your work out loud. Like, if you
Yeah.
can't say the sentence, like, my rule is like, if I can't say the sentence in one breath, it's
Yeah.
definitely gotten way too long.
Yeah. And so Autocrat, you can use that free service. There's a couple other free services through that program that can help revise your work. But yes, reading your work aloud, using the read aloud feature on your
Mhm.
micro or your word processor. Now, some people say, well, that doesn't sound human. You'll get used to it. I
Yeah.
picked a voice that sounded very similar that I got used to. So reading it aloud to yourself, having other people read it aloud to you, having your computer read it aloud to you, reading it on your Kindle, as many different devices and mediums as possible is really going to help you with some of that polishing. And I one of the things that I was about to say, then I lost it. But, I'm sure it'll come back.
I know
But,
it always does, right?
uh, well, and these are all things that you can do, like, on your own. Um, in my on my website, I have 3 guides. I have a developmental editing guide where is the big picture. You want to look at the big picture of your entire manuscript to make sure there's
Yes.
no plot holes and things are plausible, that everything that's happening in your world can happen within your magic system or whatever. It makes sense within the laws of this world. Um, there's a developmental edit guide for free. There is a line edit guide for free. And there's a copy edit guide for free. So you can go use those tools and it will walk you through what you should be looking developmental in your manuscript. And then there's like a checkpoint for you to go try and look at those things. And then on the line and the copy as well. And so those are all things that you can do on your own without enlisting help. That being said, do all the things on your own, but you do need help. And that may mean critique partners, beta readers, book coach, uh, hiring someone to do some editing or teach you some things. Um, there is a website called Critique Match that
Yeah.
they have a bunch of freelance editors there, and you can hire them per word for like a chapter or two. And so I did that with my young adult debut for like 3 chapters until I saw the things that she kept pointing out repeatedly
Mhm.
because w- I trust me, whatever's happening in chapter 1 that's not working is probably happening in the rest. And that's okay.
Yeah.
We don't know what we don't know. When I first started writing, I didn't know what filter language was. And someone pointed it out to me. I'm like, what do you mean I can't say the word hear and see and feel? And then I realized that puts distance between my reader and my story. I'm like, oh, okay, I can fix that now. But it's you learn these things as you
Mhm.
go. So Critique Match is great for just short. And I think you also can find critique partners there as well. And
Yes.
Autocrit is helpful. That's still you doing the stuff yourself. But one of the things that I did in my final kind of pulling readers in um, to help me get across that finish line and feel like that I was query ready is, and this won't work for everybody. And there's 2 things that I did that I think are a little bit unique that I think we're great. So I create a Facebook group of women because my target audience is women who are all mothers, because that's a thread in my book, as being a parent and the sacrifices and things that we do for our kids. And because we were all in a mom group together already. And I said, would you guys like to join this other group and read my book and give me feedback? And they're like, absolutely. So it was about 10. It was a
That's a great
blessing.
idea.
And I would drop one chapter a week. So kind of like a Netflix series. And so they'd read the chapter, and in real time, I could see their comments. And now this wasn't a place for them to correct spelling, punctuation,
Mhm.
whatever,
That's what
because
I
they're
always tell my mom when she does my first read. I'm like, "I know there's gonna be
no,
spelling errors and missed commas. It's not what I'm asking
no,
about.
it's not the place
Story
for that.
development."
Story development. And this was fantastic because and I could see all their comments and they could see each other's comments and they would brainstorm. And it helped me see where I had plot holes. It helped me see where I had characters that weren't fully developed. And actually, there was a character that wasn't fully developed, a side character that these readers, I'm going to call them beta readers, pointed out to me. And so then I heard a book coach on a podcast, and I'm like, I'm going to go hire her. She's in Australia. She was fantastic. And she mostly works with memoirist, but my story is very much influenced by my real life and it's trauma related. So I hired her just to help me with the one character arc for this one character. So we met 3 or 4 times and we brainstormed, which is the great thing about a book coach, is someone that's going to sit there and listen to you talk about
Yes.
your book and give you ideas.
Yes.
But it wasn't like I had to spend 6 months and thousands of dollars. It was, I have pinpointed the problem, but I don't have the fix for it. And she helped me come up with just something amazing that I would have never come up with on my own. Then I wrote it, shared it with my beta readers, and then they were happy. Yeah. But I'm
Yay.
glad that I had them there to give me that feedback. And then also, at the end, I was done with the book. I'm like, I always knew where the last chapter was going to land. And those readers said, no, 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 no. We want to know what happens. We want an epilogue. And I'm like to my husband, I don't know what to write. He goes, oh, I know what you should write. It should be this. And that's what it was. So that's an interesting way to use critique partners or beta readers. Wherever, critique partners are going to be more like another author that you're kind of at the
Mhm.
same stage of the writing game and you're sharing stuff back and forth and learning as you go together. Um, the other thing that I think is really important when you start enlisting other people. So the Facebook group meant I could see feedback and get it in real time. That what did that mean? You know, we're confused about this, or we love this, or we'd like to see this happen. But if you're going to send your manuscript out into the ether to family members, beta readers that you've vetted, whomever, send them with a list of questions. Make it simple,
Oh, that's
but
a good
send them with
idea.
questions. I think I have on my website a sample of um like a checklist that you could send, say, to your early readers that are going to be like your alpha readers, like your mom and grandma and sister that don't really have the skill set to give you that critical feedback. And that's more of like a checklist. Like, at any point, did you get confused or were you bored? And it just kind of is a very simple checklist that they can fill out. And then for your beta readers, once you've gone through some of that polishing, they're supposed to get more or less almost like a polished version that you've
Mhm.
gone through the Facebook group. If you did that, you've done the developmental, you've had your relatives read it, and you've gotten their feedback, critique partners, and these are like the last people before you're going to go on submission. Um, and that's when a list of questions is really, really, really helpful. I sent those questions to my beta readers, which were very different from the Facebook mom group. It was a whole different group of readers. We don't want to keep taxing the same people because if someone reads your story once and then you revise it and they read it again, there you do forget what the original version was like, and they already have a
Yes.
preconceived notion about your story from the first version. So with a critique partner, that's different. You can swap chapters back and forth. And does this sound better than it was last time? But again, they're writing alongside with you. So it's a different type of writing relationship. But when I got the notes back from my beta readers with the questions that I sent, and not every one of them responded. And, at some point, you just say, like, "If you haven't finished it, that's totally fine. Just give me the feedback on what you have." Because if people are just gonna say, "This is great," that's
I
not gonna
know.
help you improve. And you certainly need to hear what's working because and that's always what I would do with my critique partners. I would always do and I do that with my clients too. What's working, what might need a second look. And I kind of always tell it like that because I might think it needs a second look, but they may not. But the beta reading questionnaire is a little more detailed. So I'll go searching for that and make sure I send you the link to that. So I think that's really helpful. And then once you start getting that beta reader feedback, when you start seeing similarities, like the people are saying the same thing, that's when really to take a look at what they're saying. Because if they're saying that it kind of got slow in the middle consistently, then you may want to go revisit that muggy middle, which is sometimes a really hard place to keep that
Yep.
momentum going. So look for that consistent advice across the board with those beta readers and stuff that totally doesn't resonate with you. Toss it. It's one person's opinion, and you're going to get such conflicting opinions from different beta readers. So that's
Yes.
consistency is key when they're saying the same things. Really take a hard look at that.
And this is why I love this advice of, like, sending the same questions to every beta reader
Mhm.
because then it's really getting at the core of what type of feedback you want from them, because I've sent my book out to beta readers, and I've gotten the feedback back, and sometimes it can be overwhelming, and you get it back at different times, or like, the other day, I was talking to one of my beta readers about my current novel, and she was like, "Well, I've read 2 books since then because it took us so long to get together to, like, go back over, like, what I really thought about the book." So she's like, "I can't really remember, like, I wrote down all the times you had a misspelled word or there was, like, this didn't sound right." She's like, "I did, like, grammatical notes and stuff like that." And I'm like, "That's not where I'm at right now."
No,
And
no.
so it's like they get bogged down sometimes with certain parts, like line editing, when I'm like, "No,
Mhm.
I just needed story development. I just need to know your
Right.
feedback," and now you've already forgotten it because you didn't write it down. So it was like, sometimes I think that's great advice. I love that
Mhm.
because I think that would be really helpful for you to see. Then you can see that consistency, you can see the patterns that are emerging.
Yeah. And the same thing when you go start querying. Um, a lot of authors will send form rejections. Some will give feedback. I've been on the receiving end of both. Sometimes when you give feedback to an author, it comes back to bite you. Like they get really
It
angry.
does.
If I know someone, I'm more apt to give feedback. But if you get feedback, look for consistency. And if you're
Mhm.
consistently getting passes, then it's time to look at where why am I getting passes? Like is do I need to work on my query? Am I not even getting, full request or partial request? That made me assigned to look at that query. For me, when I was querying pass after pass after pass after pass, and I felt pretty good about the condition of the manuscript, but I wasn't getting full request or partial requests. So to me, that was like, okay, they're not getting my query's not doing the heavy lifting to get them to want to request more, even read the pages. I don't even know if they're reading it. So I started really diving into that query, which is why I really love to talk to your listeners again about that. And
Well,
I
we're
changed
definitely gonna have you back for that.
one thing in my query. I changed one comp. The comp was too old and it wasn't well known enough. And I had realized that I thought that was what was holding me back. So I changed it. I found a perfect comp. And within 30 days, I got an offer of representation by a literary agent, an offer of publication by a small press, and an R&R at a larger press in 30 days after changing that comp when I had been querying for a year with nothing.
That
So
is amazing, and you're like, "If only I had known
correct,
it was the
correct.
calm." Like, if
Yeah.
only somebody had said, and I think that's a lot of times when writers have frustrations is because I don't know necessarily why
Yeah.
I'm getting that pass because, like you said, a lot of agents, when they send that feedback, sometimes it bites them, and so they stop sending that feedback, and it's really disappointing that, again, I always tell my son, sometimes a few ruin it for the many, but that is why I really when with my current query journal journey, I'm doing a lot of pitch events, that's how we met,
Mhm.
and I am wanting to like meet these agents one on one and let them feel comfortable. Like, hey, give me that like honest, raw feedback. Like, if there really is something that you like pinpointed immediately, and you have the time, I would really appreciate it. Just like let me know real quick because that would be because yeah, sometimes it's just. But again, that's also too when you have a community of other writers that is so important during this time too. You're building your beta reader community, your critique community, your writer community to reach out to them and say, "Hey, I'm getting constant rejections. Like, what does anybody like notice something there's like off the bat that maybe's wrong?" I get messages constantly all day long from people, and it really doesn't bother me because again, this is the whole reason I developed the podcast is I want to help writers. I want to like help them
Yes.
see, the potentially that like something so small that they can change that will make the difference. So what are some other things that you potentially see like right out the gate that you're like, this is just such a common mistake that debut writers are making. Please don't make this mistake when you're when you're editing and querying and like putting all this together.
Well, I think I've kind of mentioned most of them, I believe. You know, m- this is what my best advice is for where to start your story. So we talked a little bit about what not to do and all of
Mhm.
that. I think for the most part, not all stories, but for the most part, best place to start is right before the inciting incident.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes authors start way ahead of the inciting incident, where we're getting all that backstory, etc. But if you take what your inciting incident is and what that inciting incident is, to define it, it's the thing that happens or the decision that your character makes that they can never go back to the life as it was in the status quo.
The
A
game changer. You're moving from world 1 to world 2.
Two classic examples are a meet cute and a romance. They can never unmeet. They've already met. They can never unmeet. And the second one I like to use is specifically from an example would be the Hunger Games. When Katniss volunteers for tribute, life has changed. So those are two examples of an inciting incident and starting right before that happens. Um, in my story, the inciting incident is a kiss. And because, at this point, you can never take that away. And so we start right before that happens to kind of see, okay, this was that thing she wanted to do, right? Be less innocent. Well, now I'll cross that bridge. And so it's not that starting point needs to be boring. It still needs to be a scene, tension, stakes, more than one character, a power imbalance, but it can be something small. My character was just trying to get out of the house, and the siblings were in the way. This sibling needed something to eat, and this sibling needed this, and the parents weren't home, and the older sibling didn't want to watch the younger sibling. So that's what was happening in the first scene. She just wanted to get out of the house because she wanted to go see if she could, you know, cook up with this guy. So that was all happening on the page. We didn't have the history of how her family moved to this small town or anything like that. And I think that's probably something else too that we can quickly talk about for polishing your work, especially in the opening pages as flashbacks and backstory. I am a big proponent. I prefer zero backstory in the first chapter. I think that it pulls the reader out of this new world and new
Uh-huh.
characters they've just gotten to know. So we're already disoriented and trying to figure this space out. And if you then pull them out to tell them a different story, I'm always like, if it's necessary for a flashback to be in this first chapter, why aren't we starting with telling that story? And
Yeah.
again, that's all stuff that you as the author need to know and that you will be able to dribble throughout your novel as it goes. For example, later on in my story, the main character gets a letter from her mom and it smells like her mom's perfume. And it very quickly, a very quick trigger, she remembers how when she was little, that smell was so comforting to her if something would go wrong and her holding her mom and she wishes she could hold her mom right then. So it makes sense in that moment because there's a trigger in the real world. Um, and so that's something to really think about. I see a lot of authors just info dumping backstory without a trigger. And the other thing, this is something that I really hone in on when I'm reading a manuscript, plausibility and everything matters. And in this particular instance, um, plausibility to me is huge. And it will cause me to sometimes say, this is going to require too much editorial work because
Yes.
if I'm seeing this here, it's probably throughout. And what I mean by that is let's think about timing. Time exists and it still exists in fiction. So let's pretend that two characters are talking back and forth, like you and I are talking back and forth right now. And you're not thinking about a previous thing that happened to you in your childhood with somebody else while we're having this back and forth conversation. You're probably thinking about what I'm saying, about what you're going to say next. So I think that really matters when when you're plotting out a conversation or structuring a conversation. Make sure any interiority that you give the character that's not speaking, that's being spoken to, they would have the time in that conversation to think that, and it makes sense for them to think that. So, for example, if you got a character that's clenching their fists and gritting their teeth, we don't need to hear them in their head say how angry they are. We can
Yeah.
see it. So they can think something more specific instead of labeling the emotion, as showing. And then also, as
If you're
far as
showing,
timing,
don't also tell it.
correct. And also,
Yeah.
as far as timing goes with plausibility, I see this a lot. A character's walking from point A to point B. That would take them like 30 seconds. Yet they have like a 3 paragraph inner monologue. So that's not plausible. Walk that distance and see how long you would have time to think and let
Yeah.
your character think for that long. Those things sound so picky, but trust me, they impact pacing, they impact immersion in the story, all of those things. And if you write literary fiction, you get a little more freedom and flexibility to be creative with your language and your prose and to go off on these literary tangents. But for commercial fiction, again, like I've said before, succinct, simplistic, and let's get there and get it done. I'm walking to
Yeah.
my car. I can have time to think one sentence, and that's about it. So
Yeah. I know I find myself whenever I'm writing dialogue, I literally am talking out loud to myself because I'm
yeah.
checking myself like, how would I say this next? Or how would this character say it next? And
Hmm.
so all those things are really great. So I one more thing I do want to talk about is I think there's a misunderstanding about how much an agent helps an author get their manuscript ready to then go sell to a publisher. So I'm thinking like when you're like, this manuscript needs to be submission ready, and we have got to do all this beta reading, all this editing, and all these like revisions before we even start submitting to you. Because when you get that manuscript, how much time do you honestly really have to help this author kind of improve it before you need to be selling it?
I'm an editorial agent. I enjoy that part of the process. So if the query does the job, like if I love the premise and then I read the synopsis, and if the synopsis holds up pretty well, the story goes where it needs to go, and there's a satisfying ending, and the writing is, let's say, 50% there. If the author is willing to do the work, if I'm in love with the premise, I already know editors that would love it. Um, I Zoom with the author and I could tell we would have a great working relationship. Then I'm willing to take that author on as a client, so long as they know there's significant revisions that need to be done. And typically, that's line level stuff. Most of the time, if I'm in love with a story, it's line level, and that's easy to learn. I think because once you learn something about, let's say, filter language or whatever it may be, or words that you can cut from your manuscript that really don't matter, like that and just, and once you start learning those things, it's easy to apply it. Like I can flag it in chapter one and say, go through the rest of your manuscript and make check for this. And so I think that's is if the story holds up, but it needs some editorial work, that's fine. And I do try to get through it pretty quickly as we possibly can. With picture books, obviously, that's easier. I will say that most of the picture books clients that I have signed are just absolutely stellar writers, and I read it, I'm like, "There's absolutely nothing I could do to make this any better," because it's so good. But what we work on is the pitch. We work on making sure that we're pitching it right. We work on to make sure that we have, again, the right comps, because when
Mhm.
I sign a client, when an agent signs a client, we have to turn around and do the same thing to editors.
Yep.
We to write another pitch letter similar to the query. Um, we have to make sure that we're sending to editors looking for what you've written, just like you should only send to agents that are looking for what you've written. And so I think it's a lot about that pitch and pitching it to the right editors. But my clients that write full length fiction, sometimes I'm like, I'm so sorry for this edit letter, but you said you were okay with it. And here's the things we need to do. And one of my clients I just signed, his premise is, oh, love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. Love it so much. This is the book my son needs. And he was a referral from an editor, but it needed some structural work. And the plot's great. Everything on the line level, it's great. Structurally, it wasn't worked. And I said,
Mhm.
I love this. I think it needs some work on a structural level. If you're willing to go on that journey with me? And he said, of course, yes. And we kind of fleshed out 4 different structures to kind of play around with the first couple of chapters. And so that's a way to kind of us to see like which one of these structures that we talked about might be the one that works. But it is competitive. When you have newer agents like myself, we are more willing typically to take manuscripts that need a little bit more editorial work. Once got 20, 30 clients, you just don't have the time. And to offer that editorial feedback, there's just no, and that's part of the process that no one's getting paid for. So the
Yes.
longer we're in the revision process, the longer we're delaying, hopefully selling a manuscript, even though the revision process is to get it in a better condition to send it to editors. And when you think about there are more and more, I heard an agent say this the other day. There are more and more agents leaving the industry and more authors joining because
Yes.
most of the agents typically kind of burn out because they're not getting paid up front. All of
Mhm.
it free work. And so the to see the economic gains for all of your hard work can take years. And so a lot of agents have families and bills, and so they can't sustain. So there's a lot leaving. Um, Fortunately for me, I'm doing this because I want to. I had a 20 plus year career as a librarian. And so I'm committed to staying with my clients for the lifetimes of their career, but you just never know. And again, there's so many more offers. So the expectation that work is more polished becomes more important the more seasoned the agent is, I believe, for the most part, because they just don't have time to spend 6 months with an author editing their work. And also thinking about this, when I first opened for queries, the first weekend, it was 48 hours. I got about 700
I
submissions.
knew it was gonna be a crazy number.
8 hours. And so that's a lot of work for someone to read. So the easier it is to read, the more chances you stand at someone being able to, request more pages.
Yes, and I'm so excited to talk about it again with you next season and kind of dive
Yeah,
into the querying process and all that stuff. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been
of
such
course.
an amazing conversation. I appreciate you sharing all of your knowledge with our debut writers. And I look forward to next week. We were going to be talking to Amy McConnell. She is another agent that has
Oh,
worked
nice.
a very long time in this industry. And so make sure that you subscribe and you follow so you don't miss out on anything. And I will make sure to link Amy's website, which is an incredible resource. Please, please, please go check this out
Thank you.
on our newsletter and in the comments as well.
Thank you so much for having me. And your podcast is such a great resource. And I learn stuff from you all the time.
Oh, good. Thank you so much.